Looks like we're live. Rob Ager, man, it has been this is so crazy to be interviewing you. Can you give us an introduction of what it is that you do? What is collative learning? What is that all about?
Collative learning is a term that I came up with. I must have been about 27, 28 years old at the time. I was really into self-help books and psychology stuff and all that, and I was studying tons of it. And I was writing a book of my own, pretty much for my own use, really, just a way of organizing all the thoughts, because I was studying all these different types of therapies and hypnosis and all that kind of stuff, and trying to figure out which things worked, which things were bullshit. And so by writing the book, I was organizing my own thoughts in doing that, and was trying to think up a name for the book. And because all the information I was getting was coming from multiple sources, and I was drawing it all together and organizing it, the word collative came to mind, which, to collate is to gather information together and then organize it and, get rid of the stuff that doesn't work. So that's where the name came from. And when it came time to doing the website and the YouTube channels with the film analysis stuff, I knew that I didn't just want to do film analysis. I knew that I wanted to breeze in and out of other topics. So I just called it Collative Learning, which was the topic of the book. Yeah.
Did you ever publish that book? I don't think I've seen that on your page.
It's on the website. It's not on the film analysis page. It's on the Insight page. It's about I think it's about a 90-odd page book, just written in a very straightforward language with some diagrams and stuff in it. And once every 4 or 5 years or so, I'll go back to that book and read through it, and I'm like, Jesus, I forgot about that. There's all these techniques in the book that I'd used to sort out my own life, because I had a lot of problems when I was younger. And sometimes I go back to the book, I look at it, and I'm like, whoa, I can actually use that with problem situations I've got right now, and it often helps. So, I'm glad I wrote the book, because a lot of the stuff that's in it I would have forgotten otherwise.
So did you draw a lot from your psychological practice, because you were a psychotherapist before?
No. I wasn't, at least not an academically trained psychotherapist anyway. I was studying a lot of hypnosis and NLP and things like that. I mean, these are things that are sort of, the academic community frowns upon hypnosis because it's not something that they can easily understand. It's not something that you can, it's hard to actually test hypnosis to find out what's really going on in the brain when hypnosis is being done, but it does work. I've done transinductions with people before in groups and practice groups. I've been taught how to do it. And I learned a lot about doing that kind of stuff. But nobody really knows exactly why hypnosis works. There's theories on it, but it's just, but in practice it does work. It gets results. So it's one of those things that's kind of shunned a little bit by academia, and every now and then you'll get academic psychologists who a lot of them don't get very good results with people generally, and they usually call it client resistance. If the therapist isn't getting a good result, it's the fault of the client and not the therapist. So they call it resistance. And I kind of lost track a little bit there, but so what was the question again? Where were we up to on that?
You had a background in helping.
Oh yeah, what was my background? Yeah, so I was studying all that kind of stuff, and I was going to practice groups and actually doing the stuff for real instead of just reading it in textbooks. And I was working in mental health, and I was working with learning disabilities and the homeless and stuff like that. So I was working in all these different environments, and I was trying to practice all these techniques in all the places that I went to, wherever I had an opportunity to, just to find out what actually works and what doesn't compared to what's written in textbooks. And so, yeah, the book that I wrote was basically the result of all of those experiences. And at that point in my life, I didn't have any intention of doing any kind of published film studies or film analysis. I loved my movies, and I did have sort of an aspiration to make movies, but the scope wasn't there for me to do it because digital cameras weren't available to the public back then. Yeah.
So that was pretty much the beginning of everything it is that you have on your website. It was looking at a lot of self-help stuff and then trying to integrate that into your own approach in your own life, and then also helping with the mentally ill people that you worked with. I read a little bit about some of your background. I know your father had a situation whenever you were growing up, and then that kind of spurred you on to want to be more involved with helping people that had mental health issues. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, my dad was a psychiatric nurse. So, from a young age, he was like, hey, check this out. He passed me books on stuff like Freud and Carl Jung and stuff. And as a kid, I'd be like, whoa, what the hell? So I was learning a lot of stuff there from my dad, and he was introducing me to a lot of ideas and things. And funnily enough, that kind of crossed over into movies, because we would watch Hitchcock movies, and my dad would point out things in Hitchcock's work that related to Freud and things like that. So at a very early age, I was introduced to these like sort of concepts, which most people today are still not really aware of. They watch a Hitchcock film, they're not aware that that stuff is going on. But it's even among the academic circles who've studied Hitchcock's work, it's generally sort of accepted that there's Freudian elements in there. But I think Hitchcock was way more clever than that, at doing that stuff, than the academics have given him credit. So yeah, the film analysis stuff was partially born out of that, watching movies with my dad and him having this psychiatric nursing background. But then years later down the line, my dad started to go a little bit wacky himself for all kinds of complex reasons. He had a series of life traumas that sort of sent him downhill. And, I know from working in mental health myself, a lot of people who have these like episodes where they reach a point in life and then they just go crazy, and they might end up officially being called a schizophrenic or not. Usually that kind of going wild mental response is triggered by a series of traumatic events. And often it's when the traumas come all at the same time. It's like a lot of people can deal with one or maybe two major traumas happening close to each other. But when a person gets hit by, like, say, 3 or 4 major traumas all at once, it just seems to just demolish the brain and send the person off into a crazy fantasy world. And the complexity of dealing with the traumas seems to be something that overloads people. I saw that quite a lot with the case histories with people, multiple traumas simultaneously. Yeah.
So do you ever see people recovering from that kind of like schizophrenic? Like if somebody has a schizophrenic episode and they completely kind of lose touch with reality, can they come back from that?
Yeah. It does happen. I mean, I don't know if it would necessarily be. Well, you talk about the schizophrenic label. That's always something I've had a big question mark on, because I think some people get called schizophrenic who aren't. And for me, the sort of the big bar that sort of separates out who should be given the label of schizophrenia and who shouldn't. And not that I'm an expert on this at all. This is just my personal opinion on this, but it's the hallucinations element. If a person has like confused belief systems, but they're not having sensory hallucinations, then to me that's not proper schizophrenia. That's just a person who is confused or in denial. That type of thing. And I think my dad's mental illness that he got later on was of that nature, because he didn't have hallucinations, sensory hallucinations. But then, when you work with in a clinical setting with people who've got full-on schizophrenia, a lot of them, they see people running at them in the room with samurai swords and things like that, or they constantly hear voices telling them to kill people and stuff, and they struggle with these sensory things. To me, that's a real proper mental illness where there seems to be something cognitively wrong. So hallucinations is the bar that separates, in my view.
Yeah, that's the element of life that is just like it's pure chaos. You see somebody who's been hit with that. My father had a similar mental health issue towards the end of his life, and you see somebody get hit with that, and you're just like, there's really nothing it is that you can do to save this person that you care about. You know,
Yeah.
It's so.
I mean, I don't know about how you dealt with your situation there, but with mine, I mean, and a lot of people sort of broke off contact with my dad because he was very paranoid. He was accusing people of all kinds of things. And I mean, it was probably just the fact that I'd worked in mental health helped with this anyway. And ironically, getting some early sort of training from him in it. So I always maintained contact with him and took a lot of his statements with a pinch of salt. And I used to have a laugh with him about it. You know, I often found this really, really good. You know, people with mental health problems. You don't have to sort of like be also very concerned and let's talk seriously about your problems. You can actually have a laugh with these people and have a joke about the delusions. And it's amazing how they often open up and reveal things or even allow their own beliefs to be questioned if you do it in a humorous way. One of the funniest things I ever saw in that respect was I was working in a mental health day center, and you tend to get like there's a lot of delusions that are very frequent. I mean, if you work in lots of mental health settings, you meet Jesus many times, you'll meet the devil many times. I think I met Paul McCartney about 3 times in various mental health settings. And I always thought to myself, what if you got all these people together and they'd all be arguing, I'm Paul McCartney, you know. So that's but yeah, I remember sitting in like a lunchroom in this day center, and one guy was, you know, he looked like Lemmy from Motorhead, and he was saying, "I'm the devil," and all. He's just giving everybody the stare. And this other guy sat near to him, and he goes, "I've met you." Everyone in the room, all the mentally ill people, just burst out laughing because they saw the irony of these conflicting delusions that came together. So yeah, I always found humor was great. Humor is great therapy. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really interesting. That's a really interesting thing. So these people that are dealing with these mental health issues. So you're dealing with people who have these mental health issues. When do you start branching out and start doing other things that are more creative? Because I know you've always been an artist, but like, how did that spur the next step with your website and whatnot?
Well, it was basically because digital video cameras became available on the market. You know, I always had some sort of idea that I wanted to make movies at some point, but I couldn't see any path to it because I came from a fairly very low class background, really. You know, here in Liverpool, rough parts of Liverpool, and in the neighborhoods I grew up in, the idea of going to university was like, that's what rich people do. You know, I didn't know anybody who went to university. There wasn't really anybody in my family who went to university. So that was just unheard of. And so I was never really given any encouragement or belief that I could do a thing like that. So making films was just like, oh, it would be nice in a different life if I was born in a better place. But then digital video cameras came on the market and it was like, great, you know. So yeah. I went and bought a really cheap camera and just started messing around and stuff. And a lot of it was just jokey stuff I was doing with friends. You know, we were filming TV shows and doing our own drunken voiceovers of the, you know, we filmed the TV screen. We put the news and weather on, turn the volume down, and we'd just get drunk and do the voices of the characters and then play it back and just be in tears of laughter. It was so much fun. But actually, much earlier in my childhood, I did have an experience of filmmaking, which was very basic but fun, which is my dad had rented a VHS video camera. Yeah, every now and then you could go and rent one from a video shop back then if they happened to have them. We would just rent one for the weekend, and we would just film our own reenactments of classic movie scenes for a laugh. So I remember, like, my cousin was with me. We were living in Canada at the time, and my cousin was over on holiday. We got this VHS camera, and we was like, let's film our own comedy version of the Psycho shower scene. So I had my cousin with one of those bag things what the women wear on their head so they don't want to get the hair wet, and he's in the shower, and I think somebody was stabbing at him with a Lego knife, And he's screaming like a girl and all this, and you can see someone's hand throwing the ketchup in. It's so funny. I wish I had those videos, because I'd love to just put them on YouTube today. They'd probably get loads of views. So yeah, we were always messing around doing things like that, but there was no option to do editing. You basically just had to film one take with the camera, pause, get your next camera angle, do your one take, and just do it like that. You had no option to redo takes or re-edit. So that was the earliest experience of actual filmmaking. But then once the digital video cameras came out, it's like, wow, you can upload this to your computer, you can chop it up, you can play around, you can change things, and and that opened it all up for me. So then I started making short films, and got really heavily into it. So I was working part-time, doing all the mental health stuff and all that kind of thing. And in my spare time, I was just, because I didn't have any kids, I was just like blitzing the filmmaking and doing fairly big projects. Like the very first one I did, it was sort of a horror thriller called The Victim. It was like a half-hour serial killer film. And I really went for it with that one. We had a crew of about 30 people, and I'd never been on a film set before. So I was just like, fuck it, just dive in. Who cares if it fails? Just dive in and learn, do as much as you can. And spent about 6 months on the pre-production on that one, and the eventual shoot took about a week. But man, learned so much stuff from doing that. Because a lot of people, when they're doing, they want to get into filmmaking, they start off by being a runner on sets, fetching tea and things like that, and they watch what's going on, and they gradually sort of move up. Oh, now I'm going to hold the microphone, things like that. And maybe 10 years later, they might go, well, I might write and direct a 5-minute short film. But I was just like, no, fuck it. Just write a script now, dive in at the deep end, and just do everything right off the bat without building up to it. So it was a hell of an experience. And I ended up doing 3 short films, and then eventually a feature. And they were all shot with the crap cameras. They weren't even HD. It's a shame. I wish they were HD. I'd love to remake them in HD. But that stuff, making those films, taught me a lot about the filmmaking process. But also from the point of view that I think a lot of people who work in the film world, they're limited to 1 or 2 roles. A cinematographer won't know much about screenwriting because they haven't really done it, and that type of thing. So a lot of people get boxed off into these small roles. But when you dive in on a big project and you involve yourself in every aspect of it, from the finance to the editing to the direction and all that, you start to learn how these different disciplines cross over into each other, how they relate to each other. So I just felt like that was an explosion of learning. And so it was then at that point that I was studying the classic movies, the Hitchcock stuff and the Kubrick and classic scenes, trying to figure out how to make my own films better. Then I started noticing what they'd done in these movies and how amazing it was. And then that took over, and the filmmaking aspiration got shoved aside. And it was like, hold on, I want to tell everybody about what these guys have done, So yeah.
Wow. Okay. So that's interesting, because I always thought it was going to be the other way around. I thought maybe you had started with the film critiques, the film studies, and then it ended up turning into you doing your own personal stuff. But you're saying it was the other way around. So what was it like writing that? Because like I'm currently writing my own thing, my own comic, and it's hard to like get your hands around it, because it can just go on forever, So what was your process as far as writing? Do you start with an ending and then you try to work your way backwards, or?
The best piece of advice I ever received on writing was from Clive Barker, Hellraiser.
Oh,
he's from Liverpool, funnily enough. Love Clive Barker. He's great. Just one little statement he made in an interview just really helped a lot. He was asked about writer's block, and he said when he does his first draft, he just uses pencil and paper, and he just writes and writes and writes and writes without reading back, and he just blasts out that first draft as fast as he can without any consideration of whether it's going to be any good or not. And only then afterwards does he go back and take a look at it all with a critical eye, and then it's like then he can start fixing things and changing things. But by getting it all out in the open first, on paper, I think that makes it easier, because I think a lot of people try to work everything out in their head first and then do the actual writing. But if you just blast out your thoughts on paper, it's easier to sort it out, because it's complex, isn't it? And you can get a bit of a headache trying to figure out all the intricacies of your script. But once it's on paper, you can make notes, you can cut things out and rewrite and all that kind of thing. So that first skeleton draft is just like a blast of expressed information with no critical thought. Yeah, so that helped me a lot.
So you usually start with like a notebook, and then you just write out your first draft, and then you go back and like maybe type out the next draft.
Yeah, I mean, that first draft, it doesn't even have to be like very long. It can be like 5 pages. It can be like a treatment, you know. But as long as it's done fast and it's expressive, and you're not judging yourself too much as you're doing it. It works for me anyway. I don't know if it would work for everybody else. I mean, I suppose these days maybe I wouldn't need to do that. I mean, my thinking's a lot more organized and purposeful when it comes to writing now. So I guess these days I'd be more inclined to just flesh out the themes on paper first, list them, and rank them in order of importance, or maybe map them out in terms of how they relate to each other. And then I would probably come up with a skeleton structure for the story that I think most communicates all of those themes effectively. There's lots of different ways of doing it, but yeah, for the writer's block, I recommend the what's his name, Clive Barker approach.
So do you see yourself going back to making short films anytime soon?
I don't know. It's because I'm a dad. It's like,
oh yeah,
when you're a parent, it's like, Jesus, it's so hard to find the time.
Yeah.
I mean, I would like to make films again, fiction films, but actually really, really enjoy the stuff I'm already doing anyway. The film analysis stuff, I've not gotten bored of it. There's so many more movies that I want to do. And in some ways, it's better than making films, fiction films, because making a fiction film is so much effort and time and money, colossal amounts of effort just to make, say, like a half decent 20-minute short film. You can spend a year just doing that if you want to make something that's really, really good. But in that year, I could produce like 12 or 15 hours worth of other videos on other things that are done on a more casual basis, like what I do with the film analysis. And in some ways, that's more satisfactory, because you're getting a hell of a lot more material out there, and it's easier to do in the physical sense, and you get to explore more ideas. I mean, I always had the problem with painting pictures. I used to be an artist when I was younger, and I used to sometimes I'd paint these sort of science fiction and fantasy pictures, and I put loads of detail into them. Sometimes I spent like 2 or 3 months painting a single image, a single painting. And it's like, is it worth spending all that time just to do one painting? Why not have something else that allows you to be just as expressive and get out a hell of a lot more material that covers a lot more ground? Yeah, so I mean, if I never ever go back to fiction filmmaking, I wouldn't really complain too much. I did 3 short films that were 20 minutes to half hour each, and I did one extremely low budget feature film. So I'm happy with that if I never do anything else.
Wow. Okay, that's interesting. So before we go any further, how old is your kid?
She's going to be 8 in September.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So you're a late dad then.
Yeah, I was 40 when she was born.
So,
did a lot of partying when I was younger, so.
No, that's always encouraging to hear, because I'm about to be 36 and I haven't had kids yet. But so one of the things I really appreciate about your work is all the stuff that you post on Kubrick. I mean, you must get so much satisfaction from creating so much like educational material, because I feel like as an artist, as somebody who likes to do something creative, there's so much to draw on from what these people have done, and specifically Kubrick, because the stuff it is that you've done on The Shining, 2001, Eyes Wide Shut, I mean, like, they're classic movies in my eyes, but you just elevate them to the next level by going through and picking out these different things. So you said that you were going through and you were watching Kubrick's movies while you were making your own, and you started to notice some things. What was it whenever you started to notice that he had like this subtext that he was trying to communicate, like some sort of a political point of view or something? When did you notice that? When was the first time you noticed that?
I think the very first one, well, I would say subconsciously, I always felt like there was something more going on in his work. Anyway, I was always fascinated with his films, even when I was a kid. But I never ever thought to try and intentionally dissect them. I never thought that there was something to be decoded. I just felt like there was something deep going on that I couldn't get my head around. And I think a lot of people have felt like that. And that's one of the reasons that these film analyses have connected with so many people, is because they knew, they could feel that there was something more in these movies. It wasn't just me who felt it. But yeah, it was when I started studying some of the scenes shot by shot, studying the lighting and all the very specific props and the types of colors he used. And I wasn't trying to decode anything. I was just trying to figure out how he made these amazing films so I could do better myself. And I would say the first one was probably The Shining. I was studying the scene of Jack Nicholson arguing with Wendy, and she's got the bat, and they're arguing. She's been looking at the typewriter and seeing all the rantings that he'd written about all work and no play. So I was studying that scene because it was a classic scene, and studying that, and I was thinking, okay, what's going on here that makes this such an interesting scene? And just basic observations to begin with, like the size of the room that they're in, this gigantic room, and the voices echo everywhere. So it makes them look like small, sort of vulnerable characters. And that got me thinking about, well, the size of the Overlook Hotel, these huge rooms, and the fact that it's like a maze and you're alone there. Well, you've got one or two other family members there with you, but other than that, the place is empty. So large, empty, open spaces was the first thing that I sort of consciously started to really pick up on from that scene. And then what else was? Yeah, that was the first thing, was the large, open, empty spaces. And I started looking at the rest of the movie in terms of that. And I started noticing that there was a lot of sets where doors were left wide open. Like in the background, a doorway to a bathroom would be open. And you're like, well, why is the bathroom door open there? Why are we seeing into the bathroom? Is that just to enhance the sense that this is a huge not empty, but a huge maze-like space? Having these shots where there's always a hallway, or there's always a corridor or a corner or something visible to remind you that you're in sort of a maze. So that stuff started dawning on me first, and I think it was after that I started to notice the Native American genocide subtext. A lot of props in the hotel related to Native Americans, and there was that famous line where he says the hotel was built on an Indian burial ground, which always planted the seed that maybe there was some Indian ghosts haunting the hotel or something, But then when I started noticing all these Indian props throughout the hotel, I was like, hang on, is this place haunted by the ghosts of dead Indians? What the hell's going on there? So those were the seeds where I first started to actually break things down. And I think the first video I did on The Shining, it had some elements of the Native American genocide. It had some elements of the open wide spaces and the echoed voices. The sound is very important in the film. There's a lot of the music has an echoed quality, so it sounds like it's reverberating around a maze. So that stuff was some of the first things, and foreshadowing as well. There's some really powerful instances of that really hit me, such as Jack throwing the tennis ball in the Colorado land at the wall, and it makes these thudding loud noises that echo all over the hotel. It's like bang, bang. Okay, that's a quite visceral moment in the film. And then when I was watching the scene where he's chopping the door with the axe, it was like bang. I was like, hang on, was that tennis ball thrown against the wall? And he's throwing at the figures that are above the fireplace. Is that a foreshadow for chopping the door down with the axe? Hang on, what's going on here? So a lot of the foreshadowing stuff was starting to kick in for me. The camera chasing Danny on the tricycle around the hotel. And I was like, that's so similar to the camera chasing him in the maze at the end. And the similarities in the music and sound effects between the two. And so, yeah, a hell of a lot of that stuff. I was just noticing that a lot of Kubrick had been using foreshadowing to implant a lot of seeds in the viewer's mind so that when the horror eventually comes, you feel like it was always inevitable and it was unavoidable, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, those were the early things that I noticed in The Shining, and then I moved on from The Shining and I did a video on Alien, and I was picking up on a lot of the sexual things in that, the rape metaphors, and particularly the birth trauma metaphors in Alien, which is just going back to psychology stuff. I think going back maybe about to the 1930s, I've actually got a book hunted down called The Trauma of Birth. And it's a psychological theory that we all carry with us, a subconscious memory of being born. And it's traumatic because you're taken from this warm, comfortable place inside the womb, and then suddenly you're ejected out into the world, and everything's loud and bright and spacious and terrifying. And well, the world outside the womb is alien to what's in the womb, you know. So that's, you know, the birth trauma theory had been around for a long time, and I'd been noticing that in Alien there seemed to be a lot of stuff relating to birth trauma. There's a lot of the imagery and sounds in the film induce a lot of sleep states. The first 20 minutes of the film is almost like hypnotic. You've got characters wake up out of the sleep, and they're really sleepy a lot of the time. And the sound effects of the ship are very organic, almost like heartbeats. And some of the sound effects almost sound like digestion. And the ship is called Mother, you know. So it's like the characters are inside Mother, and when they go to the alien moon, the moon where the alien craft is, there's a scene where the three astronauts in their suits, they go out of the ship, and the door opens, and there's a blast of cold wind and loud noise and all that kind of stuff. So I was watching things like that in Alien. I was thinking, is this about birth trauma? Is there a subtext here about that plays on the audience's subconscious memory of being born and the terror of being ejected out into the terrifying cold void, you know?
Yeah.
And I mean, I won't go into it too much, but I ended up producing a video on that. And more recently, I put together a 90-minute video on that very subject, but that's a paywall item on the site. So yeah, Shining and Alien were the first two ones, and then came 2001: A Space Odyssey and Cape Fear and Psycho, and on it goes from there, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. So the ones that have blown my mind the most were the Gold Room in The Shining. The way it is that you were able to connect the photos at the end of Jack with these different people, and that, but also it seems like there's also a connection between The Shining, this Gold Room idea, but there's also a connection with Full Metal Jacket, with the reenactment of JFK's assassination, right?
Yeah.
And then also just the entire movie of Eyes Wide Shut. Like, it seems like there is a clear line between these different movies. And so originally I reached out to you with this question in mind. So he clearly had a reason to have a subtext to express his political point of view. That was kind of the point of that. And in one of your videos, you had somebody ask you why don't filmmakers today express that same level of creativity with their subtext, and you said that there wasn't any need to because everything is just out in the open. So I'm curious, with the censorship, big tech, and all this sort of thing going on now, do you think that we'll see a renaissance of that kind of subtext? You see what I'm getting? Yeah.
It's a pretty good question. Yeah. I think it will happen. It depends how the big tech censorship battle goes. I mean, there's there's an illusion about big tech that big tech is the internet, but it's not. The internet is this fucking huge place full of millions of websites, and big tech can only control certain parts of it, but not others. I mean, like, for example, my own website, I determine what's on that site. Nobody can go in there and change the content of that site, just me. Nobody can go in and say, oh, I don't like the fact that you're talking about this. I'm going to remove that from your site. So I think basically all the big tech is going to basically do is just drive people to other parts of the internet. There'll be other platforms, and there'll be efforts to shut down other platforms, but they'll just keep popping up and popping up and popping up, because the human urge to talk about things openly, whether it's political issues, social issues, or anything else, that urge isn't going away. It's not like big tech can just like silence all these issues and then everybody just goes, oh, all right, we'll all just shut up then and just carry on with life and not say anything. Bullshit. No.
Yeah.
People are going to continue to talk. And I mean, you go back through history, and there's been times in the past where people were way, way more controlled than they are now. Their access to information was far more restricted than it is now. Even with all the big tech censorship, we still have a level of expressive freedom to say what we want and reach lots of people that is new in history. It's never really existed before. So big tech has not destroyed it. They've tried to in some ways. But if they really wanted to go for it, they could just, let's take YouTube, for example. If YouTube just wants to go down a corporate model, let's just let the big corporations and the news organizations express their views on YouTube, and the average person in the street whose views might not fit with those sources, let's just shut them out of YouTube completely. Just remove them from YouTube altogether. What would happen to YouTube overnight? It would absolutely tank. So the big tech, they're stuck in a situation where we, the everyday people like yourself and I, we are the bread and butter for YouTube. It started off as a platform for us to express, and they've been trying for a long time to introduce more of a corporate model. And it's not necessarily just YouTube's fault itself. I think a lot of corporations and other sources outside have been trying to drag YouTube in that direction. But they can only, they're dragging it at a very, very slow pace in that direction, because they know if they go too far, the audience will just get lost and go elsewhere. And then all the corporations will lose all of the value of advertising on YouTube if all the users just go away. So the effort is there to try and make it much more controlled and much more in line with establishment opinions. But I don't think it's well. I think there's a hell of a lot of hesitance in terms of the strategies that are being used to control speech on the internet. Well, on big tech media.
Yeah, it seems the more that they try to do that, it just kind of backfires and blows up in their face, because people are they're so tired of like this controlled media conglomerate that can pretty much tell you whatever it is that you think. It's such an interesting time that we live in, where people don't really know what is real and what isn't, because like there's like, you go and you turn on the media and you don't know whether they're lying to you or not. It's really kind of crazy. So, but can you touch on like what are your thoughts on that connection between Full Metal Jacket, The Shining, and Eyes Wide Shut? Like, what was he getting at with that? Like, is he talking about the elites?
As far as I can tell, all that stuff seemed to mainly start with Dr. Strangelove.
Okay.
And Strangelove is, it's funny you mentioned those films, but a lot of people don't mention Dr. Strangelove. Okay. And for me, Dr. Strangelove was the most overtly political movie he ever made. It was so in your face with its themes and ideas. And it's amazing that he actually managed to get the film out there onto the market, because it was just the biggest fuck you to the military, to the intelligence agencies. It was like, whoa, what the hell are you doing, Kubrick? And he was only about 30, 32 years old at the time. It's like, what the hell were you thinking? But yeah, he got that movie out there, and I think that film was, I think his primary motive at that time, from what I read about it, because I wrote a huge study on Dr. Strangelove, and part of it was about how Kubrick came to make that film, and he was terrified about the nuclear war. You know, everyone was worried nuclear war was going to break out, so he was reading all the time about that subject and trying to learn about the nuclear weapon systems, who was in charge of them, what the motives were. He was reading the think tank documents by the people who were in charge of the nuclear war strategy. He was really getting all the good information. And he learned so much on the subject that, you know, I've had people say to me, well, Kubrick must have been involved in the deep establishment for him to know all this stuff. But it's not actually true, because if you go and trace back through the publicly available sources that Kubrick was reading, you didn't have to be part of the establishment to learn that. It was all out there. It just required somebody to hunt all the pieces down and put them together. And when I was researching Strangelove and I was reading some of the books and documents that Kubrick had referred to, I couldn't believe what was publicly available. Some of the things they were talking about. You know, my favorite line in Dr. Strangelove was, I think it was when the Doomsday Machine is announced. You've seen Dr. Strangelove, haven't you?
No, I have not.
Oh, you haven't? Okay. I got to tell you about this scene anyway. Okay, there's a Doomsday Machine which is set up by the Soviet Union, and basically it's an automated response system, so that if any nuclear attack is made on the Soviet Union, this Doomsday Machine will automatically trigger a whole bunch of nuclear responses that will basically destroy most of the Earth. So basically the message from the Soviet Union is, attack us and we all die. Okay? They called the Doomsday Machine. Now, it's in the movie and it sounds corny, but there was actually talk in real documents about making doomsday machines in real life as the ultimate deterrent. Okay. And the line in the movie that was so funny is the president of the United States, he turns to one of the advisors, who's one of the top advisors in nuclear strategy. And he says to him, Doomsday Machine, I didn't know we were working on this, because that's part of the thing, is both the Soviet Union and Americans are trying to develop a Doomsday Machine. And yeah, the president himself doesn't know that it's being developed, or they're trying to do it. And he finds out from the Russian ambassador who says it to him, says, we only developed it because you were developing it. And then the president says to the advisor, says, I didn't know we were developing this. And I've never heard of anything like this. And the Russian ambassador says, our source was the New York Times. And that was actually true. It was funny because these nuclear war strategists were actually devising these plans and announcing them to the news media. The stuff was going out in the news media. Oh, we're creating bombs that can cause tidal waves. We're trying to come up with bombs powerful enough to blow the moon in half. I'm not even joking there. That was actually in one of the documents. We want to create continent buster bombs that are so big you could blast one off over Australia and it would basically fry all of Australia in one go. And they were talking to the news media. The news media were then reporting this stuff to the public, but the Soviet Union were keeping track of the US news media and going, oh shit, we better develop that before they develop it. And so that was the back and forth that was going on, that was escalating the conflict. And Kubrick was right onto that pattern. And he just put it across in the movie that with that one line, which just summarized the whole problem there in one line. It was amazing. You watch Dr. Strangelove, it's stunning.
Yeah, that whole era of history is really fascinating to me. I need to check that out. That reminds me of what was it that the Soviet Union gifted us the plaque on the wall, and it had a microphone in it, and it was like in the Oval Office, and it was recording like all of our conversations or something. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Was this a real event or in the movie?
Yeah, it was a real event. Yeah,
that wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah.
But it's the thing, there's like Dr. Strangelove is done as a comedy, but I mean, Kubrick said this himself. The real material that he was researching was so funny in itself, you couldn't make the movie with it not being a comedy. When I was reading through some of the documents, I was laughing my head off at times as well. It's like, I can't believe these people were in charge of nuclear war strategy and had access to potentially start a war. So Kubrick was right onto all that stuff, and he blew it all open with the Doctor Strangelove movie, and it had such a powerful impact that I think it was about maybe 8 or 10 years ago. I think it was a CIA or Pentagon, a document it was a what you call it when the information gets released further down the line that was previously secret.
Yeah, like a leak or something.
A disclosure. It was a disclosure of old information. Every now and then you get old documents get disclosed, and it was disclosed that in response to Dr. Strangelove, because the movie was ideologically affecting people who worked in the Pentagon, and they were concerned. They saw the movie and thought, what the hell are we involved in here? And I think it was the Pentagon anyway, they actually put together a documentary that was designed specifically to counter what was in the Strangelove movie, but it wasn't a documentary for the public. It was only shown to their own personnel. So that was to shield their own personnel against this movie. That's how powerful the movie was.
Is there any way to actually watch that documentary? You think?
I think it might be on YouTube. I'm sure I saw some clips of it. I don't know if it was like an hour long or it might have been 15 minutes or something.
I'm surprised you didn't include that in one of your analysis.
I think I've got like a huge study on Dr. Strangelove, which is on the website. It's probably the longest written film analysis that I've done. I think it's over 100 pages, and I'm sure I included stuff in there about it. But I mean, it'd be great to just put things like that out as publicly available, but it takes me so long to produce the content that sometimes when I spend 3 months working on something, it's like I've got to charge people for this content because I've got to feed myself and my daughter and pay the rent and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So it's some of the stuff like that is only available on the site, but maybe one day I'll release all of that stuff as free material. Yeah.
Now you put a lot of free material out on your YouTube channel. I see a lot of stuff that's like over an hour long. But so he made Dr. Strange, and it had such a cultural impact. Do you think that he was afraid of getting like Epstein before Epstein was even a thing, and he was like, okay,
he was. I mean, he was carrying a knife around with him.
No way, really?
Yeah.
Did he have people threatening him? Did he have people did he have anything like that?
He probably did. I mean, there was definitely news media articles were put out after Strangelove was released that were trying to brand him as a communist.
Oh, whoa. Okay.
Which he certainly wasn't. But that's just like the kind of standard stupid response, but he moved away from America and lived in England from that point straight after Dr. Strangelove was made. And he traveled back to America a little bit during the pre-production of 2001: A Space Odyssey. But beyond that point, he just stayed in Britain, and he wouldn't even travel back to America as far as I know, not even for holidays. I mean, that's what I got from the biographies. The best biographies on Kubrick that I've read are the John Baxter's biography and Vincent LaBruto's. Both of those are just awesome, and they both came out in the same year, 1999, which I think was when Kubrick died, wasn't it?
Okay. So did he? You said you've been to the what is the center that has all of Kubrick's material and?
Oh, the Kubrick Archives. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've been to his
Kubrick Archives.
Yeah. So have you gone through like his personal notebooks and that sort of thing, like read through some of his journals, or is that?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't find, you wouldn't find much there that openly says, "Oh, I'm going to put this theme in this movie," you know.
Right.
But there's surprisingly a lot of omissions from the archives as well. Certain types of information I was trying to find, but I was like, "Oh, that's gone. Why is that missing?" You know. For example, I was trying to find out the details of the River of Blood elevator scene, how precisely it was shot, the dimensions of the stage, and all that kind of stuff. And there was hardly any material there on it. There's big gaps in the Kubrick archives, which is quite interesting. There's enough there to definitely whet your appetite and also to demonstrate certain things, because you mentioned the gold story thing, the gold room aspects of The Shining relating to the America's history with the gold standard and the Federal Reserve and so on. I mean, I was right onto that stuff from the movie anyway, but for me, the total proof of that came in the Kubrick archives. Had Jack Nicholson's, Jack Torrance, in the movie, he had this scrapbook on his desk when he's typing away.
Yeah.
And the scrapbook, you see it in the film and you think, well, what the hell's all that about? I don't know. That is supposedly a history of the Overlook Hotel, according to Stephen King's novel of The Shining. But in the Kubrick archives, the scrapbook is there. It's fucking huge. It's like that thick, and that big. And I was like, "What? You've got that here? Bring it out to me." So they brought it out, wheeled it out on a trolley, put it on the desk, and you put rubber gloves on. It's like, my God. I was going through it, and it was all old newspaper articles about the Federal Reserve, about Woodrow Wilson, who oversaw a lot of the stuff that went on with that. The whole history of gold in the United States is all laid out in this scrapbook, along with a load of other stuff relating to World War II and other things. But most of it is about this gold stuff. And when I saw that, I was like, nobody could write that off. Why would there happen to be a scrapbook among the props which tells the history of the gold standard in America? You just cannot dismiss that. So for me, that was total proof that there is some sort of theme to do with that. In the movie and in the archives, you can come across a gem like that that really brings something to the forefront. Yeah.
And so I'm guessing once you saw the notebook, then the picture at the end of the different people, you kind of started to click with who could possibly be who, or like. Actually,
I started to notice who was who in the photograph before I went to the archives. Because remember, I was studying that end and I was thinking, well, what are these pictures? Who's in these photos, these black and white photos? Okay, July 4th ball, 1921. Okay, who are these people? Who are these people who are stood around Jack? One's got the hand on his shoulder. Who's that lady stood next to him there? She seems pretty prominent. And because I'd learned a fair few things about the gold standard myself anyway, partially in response to watching The Shining and noticing all this gold themed stuff, I can't remember. There was one of the characters that I noticed was very similar to somebody who I'd read about. I think it might have been the Woodrow Wilson one, which is a very weird one because the guy in the photo, he sort of looked like a young Woodrow Wilson. I think he's the guy who's got his hand on Jack's arm. It's almost like he's trying to hold Jack's arm down, and Jack's got like a little piece of paper in his hand, and you don't know why. And I was like, that guy looks kind of like Woodrow Wilson. What the hell's going on there? So then it was like, well, hold on. Well, I might just be seeing things there. What about the other people around him? I was like, oh my God, she looks exactly like Woodrow Wilson's wife, and she stood right next to him. And that one looks exactly like Woodrow Wilson's daughter. So how could you have 3 lookalikes of the Woodrow Wilson family stood right around Jack, you know? So then I started branching out in the photo and studying some of the other faces. And I was also familiarizing myself with the Wilson administration, which oversaw the sort of privatization of banking in America, and trying to get America off the gold standard. And I'd started to notice that some of the other people from his administration were there in that photo. Benjamin Strong Jr. he's there. The guy looks exactly like Benjamin Strong Jr. I can't remember offhand exactly where he is in the photo, but there's a dead ringer lookalike, and there's a whole bunch of other. So basically, surrounding Jack in the 20 or 30 people who are immediately around him, it's almost like half of them are lookalikes for members of the Wilson administration, which got America off the gold standard. And I was like, I could understand some of these might just be me seeing what I'm expecting to see, and I'm just, because facial recognition, especially with changing ages, is it's a dodgy area. But I was like, how can there be so many of them around Jack who look like those people? And I was aware that Kubrick had the photo of Jack Nicholson airbrushed into that picture. Apparently it was a real old photo from back in the day. And I tracked down the woman who did the airbrushing. She lives here in England. I think she's still alive now, but I spoke to her years ago. I spoke to her on the phone, and the stuff she told me about what she saw on the set of The Shining just was hilarious. And she said that Kubrick had brought this old photo to her, and she said she thought that he got it from a BBC archive. I'm not a journalist officially, and I'm not an academic officially, so therefore I can't access the BBC archives to look for that photo. But it'd be great if somebody else could track it down if that's where it is. So he'd taken this photo to this airbrush artist, and he'd said, I want to get Jack Nicholson in there, and she did the job for him, liaised with Kubrick on doing that job. But yeah, the fact that it was a real old photo, I thought, well, maybe it was taken from a time around that era, maybe sometime earlier than when the actual Wilson administration actually got its teeth into the American economy and did the things that it did. Maybe there was an earlier photo where a lot of those people were younger, maybe several years before, and they were at a party. And maybe Kubrick came across that photo and went, I'm going to stick Jack Torrance in the middle of that photo. So yeah, I was already onto that before I went to the archives. And then when I saw the book with all of the pictures of these people, and Wilson was in there a lot in the book, and all these other figures from that era, that's when I knew whether I've got all those photos, those people properly identified in that Nicholson photo at the end of The Shining, whether I've got them accurate or not, there is a gold theme in this movie. No doubt about it whatsoever. But also in the archives, a lot of the black and white photos that are seen on the walls around the hotel, they're still there in the archives. And I asked them to bring those out so I could get a better look at them. And that allowed me to identify some of the other figures and much more specifically identify them. For example, when the camera zooms in the movie towards Jack Nicholson in the end, I think it's the photo that is to the lower left of the Nicholson photo is a picture of James Mason, who was in Kubrick's film Lolita. And James Mason is looking up towards the Nicholson photo, and it is James Mason. I found a picture among the ones at the archives, and there was ones of Robert Redford and Lee Marvin, and so a lot of movie stars, and also a lot of politicians from ranging from the 1920s up to the 1950s, but all black and white photos, hardly any color. And so yeah, there was tons of those in the archives, but also in one of the biographies that I mentioned by either Baxter or Le Bruto. It was definitely one of those. There was the story about the set burning down. Have you heard about that with The Shining?
No.
The big Colorado Lounge set where Jack does his typing. It's a massive set. And it went on fire and it burned down during the production. Wow. And Kubrick had them rebuild the whole fucking set. Just so that he could get a few extra shots in, right? And everyone was like pissed off. Oh my God, we gotta rebuild. No way, you know. This is one of the many funny things that happened in that production. Well, anyway, according to the biographies that I read, the published biographies, a lot of those photos were burned and went missing. They were on loan from, I think it might have been Warner Brothers, and they apparently got burned in the fire. So it was like, sorry, we can't give you your photos back. Mm-hmm. You know, and yet they turn up in the archives. You know what I mean? So it's like, if that's true, if what they said in the biographies is true, then it sounds to me like Kubrick just basically kept the photos and stuck them in his archives and just said that the fire had burned all the photos. You know, that's, you know, things like this you come across and you're like, what the hell's going on here?
Oh, man, what a fascinating guy. Like,
another funny one. This one's really funny. When I talked to the woman who did the airbrushing, she went on set one day and she'd never seen all these sets before, and she was amazed at these fantastic overlook sets. And Kubrick was trying to talk to her about doing this photo, but she was so distracted. And Kubrick said, "I tell you what, I'll take you around the place, have a look at all the sets, and then we can just sit down and discuss doing this photo." So we did. He took her around the place, and she went into what we see in the movie as the gold room, and it was actually the silver room, and all the walls were tiled with silver. And she said that all these technicians had spent hours and hours gluing these individual silver tiles onto these walls to get that nice effect. And then Kubrick took one look at it and said, "That's awesome. Yeah, that's great. Can you redo it in gold?" You know?
Oh my God.
that one just totally cracked me up. You know, so funny. Yeah. But then silver and gold with the monastery thing. You know.
Yeah, from some of the videos you've mentioned that he was just like a total pain in the ass to work with. From what everybody says.
It does sound like it, doesn't it? Yeah. Nightmare.
So so you did some of this awesome work with like Kubrick and then Alien and all these other films. When did you start looking into like doing the video game analysis? And when are you going to do a Metal Gear or Silent Hill analysis?
So many people are asking about Silent Hill 2, and I remember playing it back in the day, and I remember it being pretty creepy and good. But there's a lot of obsession with Silent Hill 2. I don't understand why, because I haven't gone and read up on any theories about it. I haven't played the game since it first came out, so I have no idea. But a lot of people are preoccupied with that game for some reason. But I don't even know how you play it these days. It was on PlayStation 2, I think, way back in the day. How do I play a PlayStation 2 game now? I don't know. But yeah, I'm getting more and more and more interested in video games. And I mean, today, I think I mentioned in an email to you before, I've been recording a lot of footage of Skyrim today, because I've been fascinated with the Elder Scrolls games ever since I played Morrowind back in, when did that come out? I think
like 2009, 2005, something like that. That was a
I think it was closer to 2000, you know.
Yeah.
That's long. In fact, yeah, it was, because I was in my late 20s at the time, so it couldn't have been any later than 2003. But yeah, Morrowind blew my fucking head off. I was amazed. It was way better than any other video game I've played, more in depth anyway. So fascination with Elder Scrolls from that point. And so yeah, I mean, I'm doing some stuff on Skyrim at the moment. So I was recording some playthrough today with just sort of a randomish commentary about what I consider to be the psychological appeals of Skyrim. So I'm doing that as I'm playing it, because you know, a lot of playthrough commentaries are just how to beat the game, how to get past this level and all that kind of thing, or just people overreacting with their emotions. Oh my God, something attacked me, and all that kind of, it's like, fuck off with that shit. So I thought, let's do a commentary playthrough. We're actually seriously discussing what this game is about on a deep psychological level. So hopefully I'll have something out on that within the next few days, maybe. Because I think I recorded about an hour and a half's worth of footage today. And hopefully that'll be something good. But yeah, I'm really interested in video games because I do think video games are an art form that are massively underappreciated. They're not given much credit in academia. Most academic writings on video games are written by people who don't even like video games. You know, it's like having somebody study movies who doesn't like movies. What's the point in that? So yeah, I would like to get some stuff out there that really expands appreciation of video games and the role that they play in our lives. Yeah.
So you're interested in like the design of Skyrim. You're interested in the design of the world. Is that what it is that you mean? That's mostly what your thing's going to be?
Not necessarily the technical way that the game is put together. I mean, I wouldn't get into like the programming aspects and things like that. Just the psychological appeals is what I want to get into. I'm not going to talk too much about that here because I've got this video coming up on it. So yeah, for those of you who aren't familiar, go and subscribe to the channel Collative Learning on YouTube, and I'll have this Skyrim video up soon. It'll be a long play video. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I meant. I meant like the design principles as far as like how they arrange the world. Like I heard something like where they made it to where you don't walk 30 seconds in any direction without running into something interesting. Something's always got to be on the horizon that's pulling you this way or pulling you that way. Yeah. All that stuff is really interesting. I don't know if you've ever played the Metal Gear games, the Metal Gear Solid games, but I feel like those.
I played them back at Metal Gear 1 and 2. I played them right the way through when they first came out, but my memories are just so vague. I can hardly remember. But yeah, that's another series that people are preoccupied with.
We do some awesome stuff with it. That's cool. I feel like I've taken about an hour of your time. Do you just want to plug your stuff? And
well, I think I just did a moment ago, didn't I? Yeah. So check out the website and the YouTube channel, Collative Learning, COLLATIVE. So collativelearning.com and the YouTube channel, the same name. Lots of film analysis stuff, video game stuff coming up, lots of stuff on psychology, and occasionally social and political issues. Yeah.
Awesome, man. I thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Oh, thanks, Wes. I always love speaking to the fans of the videos and stuff. Yeah, it's great.
Cool. I'm going to go ahead and end it here, and we'll chat for a little bit longer, and then.
Yep. All right. Oh, that flew.